Jake Morrison stood in the center of the massive council chamber and felt the weight of 800 alien eyes watching him. The circular room stretched up toward a dome of stars, and every seat was filled with creatures that looked nothing like humans. Some had scales that changed color with their moods, others floated in tanks of blue liquid, and a few looked like walking crystals that hummed when they spoke. 3 years ago, when Jake first walked into this room as Earth's ambassador, he had been amazed by the diversity of life in the galaxy. Today, he felt only a cold emptiness in his chest. Linda Hayes sat in the human delegation section, her fingers moving across her tablet as she took notes. She had been Earth's chief negotiator since the first contact, and Jake trusted her judgment more than anyone else in the galaxy. Right now, her face showed no emotion, but Jake knew her well enough to see the anger in the way she held her shoulders. They had both known this day would come, but knowing something and living through it were two very different things. Council Prime Vextar rose from his elevated platform at the center of the chamber. The Zephyrian leader was 12 feet tall, with skin that looked like liquid mercury and eyes that glowed with an inner light. When he spoke, his voice carried through the chamber without any need for amplification. The matter before us today concerns the future role of the human species in our galactic community, he began, and Jake felt his jaw tighten. For 3 years, humans have served as our primary military force. They have fought our battles, protected our trade routes, and died for our causes. The question we must answer today is what place they should hold in our government. Jake had heard this speech before in private meetings. He knew exactly where it was going, but he let Vextar continue. Around the chamber, other delegates shifted in their seats or made the sounds that passed for agreement in their species. The crystalline hegemony's representative created a musical tone that meant approval. The void swimmers clicked their mandibles in rhythm. The Hive Collective speaker simply nodded all 6 of its heads. Humans are undoubtedly powerful warriors. Vextar continued. Their capacity for violence and their willingness to sacrifice themselves for others has made them invaluable allies. However, these same traits make them unsuitable for positions of political authority. A species that can switch from peaceful diplomacy to total warfare in mere seconds cannot be trusted with the delicate balance of galactic governance. Linda looked up from her tablet and caught Jake's eye. She raised one finger slightly, a signal they had agreed upon weeks ago. The vote was going exactly as their intelligence network had predicted. Every major power bloc had already decided to support the Zephyrian proposal. Humanity would be formally classified as guardian servants, permanent military, contractors with no voice in council decisions. Jake listened as delegate after delegate rose to speak in favor of the proposal. The logic was always the same. Humans were too dangerous to govern, but too useful to dismiss. They would be given comfortable lives, good pay, and respect for their service, but they would never be allowed to vote on galactic policy or hold positions of real authority. It was slavery dressed up in pretty words and bureaucratic language. The aquatic Federation speaker floated in her water tank as she addressed the chamber. We have seen what happens when warrior species are given political power, she said, her gills fluttering with each word. The Korthic Empire nearly destroyed half the galaxy before we stopped them. The humans may be our allies now, but can we risk giving them the tools to become our conquerors tomorrow? Jake wanted to laugh at the irony. The Korthic Empire had been stopped by human forces 3 months ago. Human ships had blockaded their home system, while human marines landed on their capital world and captured their leadership. The entire operation had been planned and executed by human commanders who had gone out of their way to minimize casualties on both sides. When the fighting was over, humans had helped rebuild Korthok cities and establish a new democratic government. If that was what conquest looked like, Jake thought, then maybe more species needed to be conquered. but he said nothing. He had learned, over 3 years of diplomacy, that sometimes the most powerful thing you could do was let your opponents reveal their true nature without interference. Today was one of those times. The debate continued for hours. Some delegates spoke about human aggression as if it were a disease that might spread to other species. Others talked about the need to manage human expansion to prevent them from becoming a threat. A few even suggested that humans might be happier without the burden of political responsibility. Through it all, Jake stood quietly and listened, occasionally making notes on his own tablet. Finally, Vexstar called for the formal vote. The chamber fell silent as the voting system activated. Each delegate's decision would be recorded and announced publicly. Jake watched the numbers climb. On the display screen above Vexstar's platform, the Zephyrian Confederacy voted yes. The Crystalline Hegemony voted yes. The Void Swimmers voted yes. The Hive Collective voted yes. One by one, every major power and dozens of smaller species added their approval to the proposal. Jake was not surprised, but he felt something break inside his chest as he watched the final tally appear. 847 species voted to make humanity their permanent servants. Only one species voted against the proposal, humanity itself. When the voting ended, Vexstar looked down at Jake with what might have been sympathy in his glowing eyes. Ambassador Morrison, do you wish to make a statement on behalf of your species? Before we finalize this resolution? Jake looked around the chamber one more time. He saw the faces of creatures he had fought beside, species he had helped save from pirates and invaders, civilizations that owed their continued existence to human sacrifice. He thought about Captain Ryan Bell, who had lost his left arm defending a crystalline colony ship from raiders. He remembered Dr. Amy Foster, who had worked 18-hour days to develop a cure for the plague that nearly wiped out the Hive Collective's home world. He pictured the thousands of human soldiers buried on alien worlds, their graves marked with flags of species that had just voted to enslave their descendants. We understand your position perfectly, Jake said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent chamber. He kept his tone level and professional, the same way he had spoken in 100 diplomatic meetings. Humanity has always been committed to serving the greater good of the galactic community. We will, of course, comply with whatever role the Sioux Council assigns to us. Several delegates seemed to relax at his words. Vexstar actually smiled, his mercury skin shifting to a warmer shade. I am pleased by your cooperation, Ambassador. This decision was not made lightly, and we hope that humans will come to see the wisdom in it. Your species will be honored and respected for your service. Jake nodded politely. I'm sure we will adapt to our new circumstances as needed. He paused and looked directly at Linda, who was watching him with careful attention. If there's nothing else, I should return to Earth and inform our government of the Council's decision. Of course, Vexstar replied. The transition period will begin immediately. We look forward to a long and productive relationship under this new arrangement. Jake turned and walked toward the exit, Linda falling into step beside him. As they left the chamber, he quietly activated his communicator and sent a single coded message to Earth. The message contained only 2 words, but they would change everything. Exodus Protocol. Behind them, the council delegates were already discussing implementation details and celebrating their successful management of the human problem. None of them noticed the small smile that crossed Linda's face as she followed Jake out of the chamber. None of them understood that they had just made the biggest mistake in galactic history. Captain Ryan Bell stood on the bridge of the UEC Defender and watched the last human transport ship clear the docking bay of Zephyrian Station 7. 48 hours had passed since Ambassador Morrison sent the coded message from the Council. Chambers and the Exodus Protocol was already in motion across 300 star systems. Ryan had commanded the Outer Rim Defense Fleet for 2 years, and in that time his ships had prevented 17 major raids on Zephyrian colonies. Today, he was pulling every human vessel back to Earth space. "Captain, we're receiving another transmission from Station Command," reported Lieutenant Amy Chun from the communications station. "They're demanding to know why we're abandoning our patrol routes." Ryan looked at the tactical display showing the positions of his fleet. 63 human ships were moving away from their assigned sectors in perfect formation. Each captain had received the same orders that morning: return to Earth immediately, provide no explanations, maintain professional courtesy at all times. Tell Station Command that our contracts have been fulfilled and we're returning to Earth for reassignment. Nothing more. The response came back within minutes, and Ryan could hear the panic in the Zephyrian commander's voice, even through the translator. "Captain Bell, you cannot leave now. Our intelligence reports indicate a major Void Swimmer assault fleet is massing near the Kepler Nebula. Without your ships, our outer colonies are defenseless." Ryan had seen the same intelligence reports. The Void Swimmers had been building their forces for months, waiting for the right moment to strike. Under normal circumstances, Ryan would have moved his fleet to intercept them before they could reach Zephyrian space. Today, he simply acknowledged the transmission and continued on his course toward Earth. On the mining world of Kepler 442b, Foreman Carl Rodriguez supervised the shutdown of the largest rare earth extraction facility in the galaxy. The massive operation employed over 10,000 workers from a dozen different species, but only the humans understood how the extraction process actually worked. Carl had designed most of the mining equipment himself, adapting human technology to work in the planet's harsh environment. "Sir, the crystalline hegemony representatives are demanding access to the main control systems," reported Chief Engineer Sophie Martinez. She had been working alongside Carl for 3 years, turning a barren rock into one of the most productive mining worlds in Council space. "They say they have the right to take over operations immediately." Carl looked at the control panel that regulated the entire mining operation. The system was incredibly complex, using quantum resonance fields to separate rare elements from ordinary rock without destroying the planet's ecosystem. It had taken him 2 years to perfect the process, and the crystalline hegemony had never bothered to learn how it worked. They had simply collected the profits and assumed the humans would always be there to run the machines. "Give them full access," Carl said calmly. "All the passwords, all the technical manuals, everything they need." He paused and smiled slightly. "Make sure to mention that the quantum field generators need to be recalibrated every 72 hours, or they'll overload and destroy half the planet. The recalibration codes are in Section 47B of the technical manual." Sophie raised an eyebrow. "Sir, Section 47B is 800 pages of quantum physics equations. Most of it assumes advanced knowledge of human mathematics." "I'm sure they'll figure it out," Carl replied. "After all, they're taking over a perfectly functional operation. What could go wrong?" Dr. Amy Foster packed the last of her research files into a secure container and sealed it with her personal encryption code. For 3 years, she had led the Joint Medical Research Project on Nexus Prime, working with scientists from 24 species to develop new treatments for diseases that affected the entire galaxy. Her team had made breakthrough discoveries in cancer treatment, neural regeneration, and genetic therapy. Most of the research was based on studies of human biology and the unique way human immune systems adapted to alien environments. "Dr. Foster, surely you cannot take all of this research with you," protested Dr. Zeltek, her Hive Collective counterpart. "This work belongs to the entire galactic community, not just to humans." Amy looked at the alien scientist who had worked beside her for years. Dr. Zeltek was brilliant in his own field, But he had never understood the fundamental principles behind the medical breakthroughs they had achieved together. Like most non-human scientists, he saw the results without comprehending the process that created them. "You're absolutely right," Amy said. "The research belongs to everyone. That's why I'm leaving complete copies of all our published papers and clinical trial results. Everything we've officially released to the galactic medical community is yours to use however you see fit." "But what about the ongoing projects? The treatments that are still in development?" Amy sealed the container and prepared to leave the laboratory she had called home for 3 years. Those projects were designed around human biological principles and require human test subjects to validate the results. Since the Council has decided that humans should serve in a purely military capacity, I assume we won't be available for medical research anymore. Dr. Zeltek's compound eyes flickered with confusion. "But without human participation, we cannot complete the cancer treatment protocols. The neural regeneration therapy relies entirely on human stem cell research. The genetic modifications we're developing only work because of unique human DNA sequences." "I'm sure you'll find alternatives," Amy replied. "The Council has spoken, and we must all accept our assigned roles in the new galactic order." Similar scenes played out across hundreds of worlds as human scientists, engineers, and technicians quietly packed their equipment and prepared to leave. On the agricultural world of New Harvest, human specialists had developed farming techniques that increased crop yields by 400%. They left behind detailed instruction manuals, but the complex soil management and genetic modification processes required constant human supervision. The alien farmers who took over the operations found themselves staring at plants they didn't understand and machinery they couldn't operate. In the Tau Ceti system, human engineers had designed a revolutionary new type of fusion reactor that provided clean energy for 30 billion inhabitants across 12 worlds. The reactors were perfectly safe and incredibly efficient, but they required precise adjustments every few days to maintain optimal performance. The adjustment procedures were documented in technical manuals that assumed the reader had a human-level understanding of nuclear physics and engineering principles. Morrison stood in his office on Earth and watched the reports streaming in from across human space. Every human facility, every human-led project, every human military unit was withdrawing exactly as planned. The process was proceeding with mechanical precision, and not a single human had raised their voice in anger or made any dramatic statements about injustice or revenge. Linda Hayes entered the office carrying a stack of diplomatic communications from various alien governments. The messages ranged from confused inquiries to angry demands to barely concealed panic. "Ambassador, we're receiving over 300 requests for clarification of human intentions. Most of them want to know when our people will return to their posts." Jake looked at the quantum communicator that connected him to the council chambers. On Nexus Prime, in a few hours, he would need to speak with Vextar and the other council leaders. They would want explanations, assurances, and commitments for continued human cooperation. He would give them exactly what they had asked for, nothing more and nothing less. "Schedule a conference call with the council leadership for tomorrow morning," he told Linda. "Make sure all the major power block representatives are included. I want them to understand our position clearly." "What position is that, sir?" Jake smiled for the first time since leaving the council chambers. "We're going to be the most cooperative guardian servants in galactic history. We're going to follow every rule, obey every regulation, and fulfill every legal obligation they've imposed on us. We're going to give them exactly what they voted for." Linda returned his smile. "Something tells me they're not going to like what they voted for." "That's their problem," Jake replied. "We tried to warn them." 3 weeks after the human withdrawal began, Commander Zettar of the Void Swimmer Assault Fleet watched his scouts return from their reconnaissance missions with news that made his tentacles writhe with excitement. The human patrol ships that had guarded the outer rim for years were gone, and the Zephyrian colonies lay open like ripe fruit waiting to be plucked. For months, Zektar had planned this campaign, but the presence of human forces had made it impossible to execute. Human tactical doctrines were unpredictable, and their willingness to sacrifice themselves to protect others had cost the Void Swimmers hundreds of ships in previous encounters. All human vessels have withdrawn to their home system, reported Scout Leader Vextan. The Zephyrian Defense Fleet consists of 47 ships spread across 12 systems. They have no concentrated forces and no coordinated defense plan. Zektar studied the tactical display showing Zephyrian space. Without human support, the enemy fleet was pathetically weak. Zephyrian ships were designed for patrol duties and policing actions, not major fleet engagements. Their crews were disciplined, but had no experience fighting against determined opponents. For 3 years, they had relied entirely on human commanders to plan their defenses and human ships to execute their battle strategies. Begin the assault, Zektar ordered. All fleets are to advance simultaneously across the entire front. Show no mercy. The attack began 12 hours later with devastating effectiveness. Void Swimmer ships emerged from hyperspace at the edge of 8 different star systems and immediately engaged the scattered Zephyrian forces. The battles were over almost before they began. Zephyrian captains, who had grown accustomed to human tactical support, found themselves facing enemy formations they didn't understand and weapons they had never encountered before. Within 6 hours, the entire Outer Rim defense network had collapsed. On Nexus Prime, Council Prime Vextar received the first reports of the disaster with growing horror. The communications center was flooded with distress calls from Zephyrian colonies begging for immediate military assistance. Orbital defense platforms were falling silent one by one as Void Swimmer forces swept through the outer systems like a plague. "Get me Ambassador Morrison immediately," Vextar commanded his staff. "Human forces must respond to this crisis at once." The quantum communicator connected him to Earth within minutes, and Jake Morrison's calm face appeared on the screen. Behind the human ambassador, Vextar could see the familiar environment of Earth's diplomatic headquarters. Everything looked normal and peaceful, as if the galaxy was not currently burning around them. "Council Prime, what can I do for you?" Jake asked politely. "The Void Swimmers are attacking our territory," Vextar replied, trying to control the panic in his voice. "Their entire assault fleet is moving against Zephyrian space. We need human military forces to respond immediately. Lives are at stake." Jake nodded thoughtfully. "I understand your concern. However, I need clarification on our current legal status. The Council recently voted to classify humans as guardian servants under direct Council authority. Could you please specify which Council member is ordering us to engage the Void Swimmer fleet, and which star systems we are authorized to operate in?" Vextar felt his mercury skin shift to a darker shade as the implications of Jake's words became clear. The Council legislation had indeed placed humans under direct authority, but it had not specified the chain of command or operational parameters. In their eagerness to control human military power, the Council had created a bureaucratic maze that made rapid deployment impossible. "I am ordering you, as Council Prime, to deploy human forces to defend Zephyrian territory," Vextar declared. "I appreciate your urgency," Jake replied. However, Resolution 2847 Alpha specifically states that humans are to serve as guardian servants under the direct command of Council authority. The resolution does not grant individual Council members the power to deploy human forces unilaterally. I will need a formal vote by the full Council to authorize military action. Vextar's tentacles writhed in frustration. A full Council vote will take days to organize. The Zephyrian colonies will be destroyed by then. I understand your concern, Jake said. Unfortunately, humans are now bound by the legal framework the Council has established. We must operate within the proper channels. The connection ended, leaving Vexstar staring at a blank screen while reports of new disasters continued to flood in from across Zephyrian space. In the time it had taken him to speak with Jake Morrison, 3 more colony worlds had fallen to the Void Swimmer assault. The agricultural world of New Harvest. The consequences of human withdrawal were becoming equally devastating in their own way. The alien farmers who had taken over the massive agricultural facilities found themselves confronting problems they had never imagined. The soil management systems that humans had installed were failing without constant adjustment, and the genetically modified crops were beginning to show signs of stress. Chief Agricultural Specialist Morden of the Crystalline Hegemony stood in the center of a wheat field that stretched to the horizon and tried to understand why the plants were turning brown. According to the instruction manuals the humans had left behind, the crops should have been thriving. The automated systems were functioning normally. The nutrient levels were within acceptable ranges, and the weather patterns were optimal for growth. Sir, we've identified the problem, reported his deputy, a young engineer named Tal Vik. The humans were making manual adjustments to the soil chemistry every 48 hours. The automated systems can maintain basic nutrient levels, but they cannot account for the complex interactions between the modified plant genetics and the local ecosystem. Morden examined the technical manual that described the adjustment procedures. The document was over 2,000 pages long and assumed the reader had advanced knowledge of biochemistry, genetics, and soil science. Most importantly, it was written from a human perspective and included references to biological processes. That only made sense if you understood human metabolism and digestive systems. Can we learn to make these adjustments ourselves? Morden asked. Talvik manipulated the control interface and shook his crystalline head. The procedures require precise timing and intuitive understanding of plant biology. The humans were not just following instructions. They were making thousands of small decisions based on experience and instinct. We cannot replicate that kind of knowledge overnight. Similar problems were emerging throughout the galaxy as alien species discovered the true extent of their dependence on human expertise. On the mining world of Kepler 442b, the quantum field generators had shut down after 72 hours, exactly as Carl Rodriguez had predicted. The Crystalline Hegemony engineers, who took over the facility, found themselves staring at 800 pages of mathematical equations that described the recalibration process. Dr. Amy Foster's replacement in the medical research program, a brilliant Hive collective scientist named Dr. Kethfor, discovered that he could not continue any of the ongoing research projects without human test subjects. The cancer treatment protocols were specifically designed around human cellular structures. The neural regeneration therapy required human stem cells that had unique properties not found in other species. Even the basic research into disease resistance was based on studies of how human immune systems adapted to alien pathogens. We need human participation to continue this work, Dr. Kethvar reported to his supervisors. Without access to human biology and human research methods, we cannot complete any of the projects that were in development. His supervisor, Medical Administrator Visinuk, buzzed with annoyance. The humans are still available for medical research. They are guardian servants now, which means they must cooperate with Council science programs. That is not how Dr. Foster interpreted the situation, Dr. Kethver replied. She claimed that human medical research requires voluntary participation and informed consent. She said that guardian servants have military duties, not research obligations. The pattern was repeating across dozens of fields and hundreds of worlds. Human experts had been quietly replaced by alien specialists who discovered too late that they did not understand the systems they had inherited. The humans had not sabotaged anything or taken any destructive actions. They had simply stopped doing the thousands of small tasks that kept galactic civilization functioning smoothly. Jake Morrison sat in his office on Earth and reviewed the reports that were streaming in from across human space. Every human facility was now operating under skeleton crews or had been completely abandoned. Every human expert had returned to Earth or one of the other human colonies. The withdrawal was proceeding exactly as planned, and the alien governments were beginning to understand what they had lost. Linda Hayes entered the office with a stack of new diplomatic communications. The tone of the messages had changed dramatically over the past 3 weeks. The first communications had been confused, inquiries about human intentions. The latest messages were barely concealed demands for immediate human assistance with various crises. 2 months after the human withdrawal began, the emergency session of the Galactic Council convened in an atmosphere of barely controlled panic. The great chamber that had once buzzed with confident debate now echoed with desperate arguments and accusations. Half the seats were empty, their occupants either dead, missing, or too busy fighting for survival to attend council meetings. The remaining delegates looked exhausted and frightened as they faced the reality of what their vote had created. Council Prime Vextar's Mercury's skin had taken on a dull gray color that indicated severe stress among his species. He stood at his elevated platform and surveyed the remnants of the civilization he had helped to rule. The reports he had received that morning painted a picture of galactic society in complete collapse. The Void Swimmer assault had reached the inner systems of Zephyrian space, destroying 3 major colonies and killing over 60 million civilians. Without human tactical support, the Zephyrian military had proven incapable of mounting any effective resistance. The situation has become critical, Vextar announced to the assembled delegates. We are facing the worst crisis in galactic history, and we need immediate human military intervention to prevent total collapse. From his seat in the human delegation area, Jake Morrison listened with polite attention. Beside him, Linda Hayes took notes on her tablet, while maintaining the same professional demeanor she had shown throughout 3 years of diplomatic service. They were the only humans in the chamber, and their calm presence seemed to make the alien delegates even more agitated. Ambassador Morrison, Vextar continued, the Council formally requests immediate deployment of human forces to combat the Void Swimmer invasion. We are prepared to authorize whatever resources are necessary to support this mission. Jake stood and activated his personal communicator so his words would be recorded for the official record. Council Prime, I appreciate your request. However, I must point out that Resolution 2847 Alpha requires human forces to operate under direct Council command. Could you please specify which Council authority will be commanding our forces and what specific orders we are to follow? The question created immediate chaos in the chamber. The crystalline hegemony's representative, Speaker Velenosh, created a discordant musical tone that indicated extreme frustration. This is not the time for bureaucratic procedures. A galaxy is burning while you debate legal technicalities. I understand your urgency, Jake replied. However, humans are now classified as guardian servants, which means we must operate within the legal framework established by this council. We cannot act independently without proper authorization. Delegate Morthan of the Aquatic Federation floated forward in her water tank, her gills fluttering rapidly with emotion. The human withdrawal has created disasters across dozens of worlds. Our food production has dropped by 60% without human agricultural expertise. Our mining operations are failing without human engineering support. This cannot be coincidence. Jake nodded thoughtfully. You raise an interesting point about the scope of human involvement in galactic infrastructure. Perhaps we underestimated how integrated our species had become with Council operations. Underestimated? Morthen's voice rose to a pitch that made the translator struggle to process her words. Your people systematically withdrew from every critical position simultaneously. This was clearly a coordinated action designed to cripple our civilization. I assure you that human withdrawal was conducted in strict compliance with Resolution 2847 Alpha, Jake replied. We simply interpreted our new role as guardian servants to exclude non-military activities. If the Council intended for humans to continue civilian functions, perhaps the legislation should have been more specific. At that moment, the Chamber's communication system activated to broadcast an urgent news report from across the galaxy. A holographic display showed scenes of devastation from multiple worlds, abandoned mining facilities with machinery rusting in the rain, agricultural systems failing as crops died in the fields, research laboratories sitting empty while critical medical projects remained unfinished. The news anchor, a Hive Collective journalist named Kefmer, delivered his report with the kind of analytical detachment that made the situation seem even more hopeless. The human withdrawal has now affected every major sector of galactic society. Economic analysts estimate that industrial production has fallen by 73%. In systems that relied heavily on human expertise, military effectiveness has declined even more dramatically, with several species reporting complete inability to defend their territories without human tactical support. The report continued with an interview featuring Alex Turner, a human economist, who had relocated to New Geneva, one of humanity's new colonies beyond Council space. Turner appeared calm and professional as he answered questions about the galactic economic crisis. The current situation was entirely predictable, Turner explained. Human integration into galactic society was based on voluntary cooperation and mutual benefit. When the Council voted to transform that relationship into one of servitude, they fundamentally altered the social and economic foundations that made our civilization possible. The interviewer, another Hive Collective journalist, pressed Turner for specifics. Are you saying that humans deliberately caused this crisis? Not at all, Turner replied. Humans simply adjusted their behavior to conform with their new legal status. Guardian servants are military assets, not civilian contractors. The Council got exactly what they voted for. But surely human leaders understood that withdrawal would cause these problems? Turner smiled slightly. Of course we understood. We spent 3 years explaining to Council leaders that galactic civilization depended on voluntary cooperation between species. They chose not to listen. The news report ended, leaving the Council chamber in stunned silence. Several delegates were staring at the human section with expressions that mixed anger, fear, and growing comprehension. For the first time, they were beginning to understand that the crisis was not temporary or accidental. The humans had not made empty threats or dramatic gestures. They had simply stopped participating in a system that no longer recognized them. As equals, Vextar tried to regain control of the session. Ambassador Morrison, regardless of legal technicalities, surely you can see that innocent civilians are dying because of this situation. Does humanity have no moral obligation to help? Jake's expression remained politely neutral. Council Prime, humanity has always been committed to protecting innocent life. However, our moral obligations must be balanced against our legal constraints. Resolution 2847 Alpha places humans under Council authority, which means we cannot act independently to address humanitarian crises. We await your orders. I am ordering you to deploy human forces immediately, Vextar declared. Under what specific authority? Jake asked. Resolution 2847 Alpha requires formal Council approval for military deployments. Do you have such approval? Vextar's skin shifted to an even darker shade of gray. The truth was that organizing a formal council vote had become almost impossible. Too many species were dead, missing, or unable to participate in governance due to the ongoing crisis. The bureaucratic system that had once given the council its authority was now preventing it from taking any effective action. "This is insane," Speaker Valanash of the Crystalline Hegemony interjected. "You are using our own laws to prevent us from saving lives." "We are using your laws exactly as written," Linda Hayes said, speaking for the first time during the session. The council wanted to control human military power through legal mechanisms. Now you have to live with those mechanisms. The chamber erupted in angry voices as delegates shouted accusations and demands. Through the chaos, Jake remained standing calmly at his position, waiting for someone to provide the formal authorization that would never come. The system the council had created to control humanity had instead paralyzed their own ability to respond to the crisis. During a brief pause in the arguments, Jake activated his communicator again. "If I may make a suggestion, the Council might consider modifying Resolution 2847 Alpha to provide clearer operational guidelines for Guardian Servant deployment. This would eliminate the current confusion and allow for more rapid response to emergency situations." Vextar looked at him with a mixture of hope and suspicion. What kind of modifications would be necessary? The resolution would need to establish clear command authority, operational parameters, and deployment procedures, Jake explained. It would also need to address the relationship between military service and civilian expertise, since many critical functions require both capabilities. "Are you saying that humans would resume their previous roles if we modified the legislation?" Jake exchanged a brief glance with Linda before answering. "We would certainly consider any modifications the Council chooses to make. However, any new arrangement would need to address the fundamental issues that led to the current situation." "What issues?" Vextar asked, though from his tone it was clear he already knew the answer. 6 months after the human exodus began, the remnants of the Galactic Council faced a reality that none of them had imagined possible. Council space, once the most prosperous and secure region of the galaxy, had become a wasteland of failed colonies and devastated worlds. The Void Swimmer Armada now controlled 30 star systems and showed no signs of slowing their advance. Pirate fleets that had once feared human retaliation now operated with complete impunity, raiding cargo convoys and slave markets with casual brutality. 3 entire species had been wiped out by raiders who knew there would be no consequences for their actions. Captain Ryan Bell stood on the observation deck of the UE's New Geneva and watched the latest council diplomatic mission arrive at the human colony. The alien ships looked small and desperate compared to the massive human vessels that now patrolled the space around humanity's new worlds. Ryan had been promoted to Admiral of the Colonial Defense Fleet, and his responsibilities now included protecting not just human settlements, but also the growing number of alien refugees who had fled to human space seeking safety. "Admiral, the Council delegation is requesting permission to dock," reported Commander Lisa Carter from the communications station. "They're claiming diplomatic immunity and demanding immediate audience with Ambassador Morrison." Ryan studied the tactical display showing the Council ships. They were heavily damaged and looked like they had barely survived the journey to human space. The lead vessel was broadcasting Zephyrian identification codes, which meant it was probably carrying Council Prime Vextar himself. The desperation of their situation was evident in every scarred hull plate and flickering energy signature. "Grant them docking permission at Bay 7, Ryan ordered. "Standard diplomatic protocols, but make sure our security teams are ready. These people are getting desperate, and desperate people make poor decisions." The Council delegation consisted of representatives from 12 different species, all of them looking haggard and defeated as they made their way through the human station. Vextar led the group, his mercury skin now a permanent shade of dark gray that indicated chronic stress. Behind him walked Speaker Velinash of the crystalline hegemony, her musical tones reduced to discordant whispers. Delegate Morthen of the Aquatic Federation traveled in a portable water tank that looked like it had been hastily repaired multiple times. Jake Morrison met them in the main conference room of New Geneva Station, the same room where he had been, holding meetings with alien refugees and independent species seeking partnership agreements with humanity. The contrast was stark. While the council delegates looked exhausted and frightened, Jake appeared calm and well-rested. The human colonies were thriving, their populations growing as more humans returned from council space and new settlements expanded across previously unexplored worlds. Council Prime Vexstar, Jake said, rising from his seat as the delegation entered. Welcome to New Geneva. I hope your journey was not too difficult. Vexstar's skin shifted to an even darker shade as he settled into his chair. Ambassador Morrison, we need to discuss immediate restoration of human military support to council space. The situation has become critical beyond anything we anticipated. Jake activated a holographic display that showed the current state of council territory. Red zones marked areas under Void Swimmer control. Yellow zones indicated regions threatened by pirates and raiders. And green zones showed the rapidly shrinking areas still under council authority. The visual was devastating. In 6 months, the council had lost control of over half their territory. I can see that you're facing significant challenges, Jake replied. However, I'm not sure how we can help within the current legal framework. Resolution 2847 Alpha remains in effect, and humans are still classified as guardian servants under council authority. We're prepared to modify that classification, Vexstar said quickly. The council is willing to grant humans expanded operational authority and increased autonomy in military matters. Jake studied the proposal that Vexstar transmitted to his tablet. The document was hastily written and full of bureaucratic language that tried to give humans more freedom while still maintaining council control over their actions. It was a compromise that would have been insulting under normal circumstances, but the desperation behind it made it simply pathetic. This is an interesting proposal, Jake said diplomatically. However, it still maintains the fundamental principle that humans serve at council discretion rather than as equal partners. Our experience over the past 6 months has shown us the problems with that approach. Speaker Velinash created a sharp musical tone that indicated extreme frustration. What do you want from us? We've offered increased autonomy, better compensation, expanded operational authority. What more can we provide? Jake looked around the table at the faces of beings who had once confidently voted to make humanity their servants. Now they sat in a human station, surrounded by human guards, begging for help from the species they had tried to enslave. The irony was not lost on him, but he took no pleasure in their suffering. The issue is not about autonomy or compensation, Jake explained. The issue is about partnership. The galactic community was built on the principle that different species could work together as equals, each contributing their unique strengths to the common good. Resolution 2847 Alpha abandoned that principle in favor of a master-servant relationship. Delegate Morthen activated her translation system with visible effort. Are you saying that humans will only return if we grant you equal political representation? I'm saying that sustainable cooperation requires mutual respect, Jake replied. Old system worked because every species had a voice in the decisions that affected them. When you took away humanity's voice while demanding our continued service, you made cooperation impossible. The delegation fell silent as they absorbed the implications of Jake's words. Around the table, each representative was calculating the political cost of granting humans equal status versus the practical cost of continued isolation. The mathematics were brutal. Without human support, their civilization was doomed. But granting human equality would require admitting that their entire worldview had been wrong. Vextar tried a different approach. Surely there must be some intermediate solution. Perhaps humans could be granted special advisor status or representation proportional to your military contributions. Jake shook his head. Council Prime, you're still thinking in terms of managing the human problem rather than solving it. The fundamental issue is trust. How can humans trust a system that has already voted once to enslave them? How can we be confident that Council attitudes toward humanity have actually changed? The question hung in the air like a physical presence. Every being in the room understood the weight of it, because every one of them had participated in the vote that created a current crisis. They had revealed their true feelings about humanity in the most public and formal way possible. And now they were asking humans to ignore that revelation and trust them again. We made a mistake, Vextar said finally. The Council acted out of fear rather than wisdom. We let our concerns about human military power blind us to the value of human partnership. That's a start, Jake acknowledged. But words are not enough. We need to see concrete evidence that Council attitudes have genuinely changed. What kind of evidence? Speaker Velinash asked. Jake activated another display that showed the current state of human space. Unlike the devastation in Council territory, human colonies were expanding and prospering. More importantly, the display showed the locations of alien settlements that had been established in human space over the past 6 months. These are refugee camps and permanent settlements for species that have fled the chaos in Council space. Jake explained. We currently provide protection and support for over 40 million non-human civilians who have requested sanctuary in human territory. We've done this without any formal agreements or legal obligations, simply because it was the right thing to do. The Council delegates studied the display with growing amazement. The scope of human humanitarian efforts was staggering, involving the protection and care of beings from dozens of different species. More importantly, the refugees were not being held in camps or restricted areas. They were being integrated into human society as full participants with rights and opportunities equal to human citizens. We also have formal partnership agreements with 17 species that chose not to participate in Resolution 2847 Alpha, Jake continued. These agreements are based on mutual respect and shared decision-making. The results speak for themselves. He activated a final display showing economic and security data from the partnership regions. The contrast with Council space was dramatic. While Council territory burned, the human partnership zone was experiencing unprecedented growth and stability. Vextar stared at the displays for a long moment before speaking. What would it take for the Council species to join these partnership agreements? Jake looked around the table at the desperate faces of beings who had once held the power of life and death over billions of creatures across the galaxy. They had wielded that power carelessly and cruelly, and now they were learning what life looked like when the power was gone.